Introduce myself quickly. My name is Liam, Economic Development Officer with ISC. And my background is kind of in the government for about the last 10 years, but I also have a fairly significant business background in consulting. And my specialty in the business world has been with franchising. Government, but more economic development and financial analysis. Dixon, do you want to introduce yourself quickly?
Yes, my name is Dixon Lowe. I'm a regional program officer with the economic development team at ISC, and I've been with ISC since 2019, working with economic development and First Nations land management as well. And yeah, glad to join everyone today.
We also have our esteemed acting manager, Vanessa. I'll just mention her and goodwill. Then presentations. I'll do a quick intro. I'll give then Dixon will take over the LEDSB, and then I'll come back on and I'll walk you guys through the corp information. This is kind of our quick agenda today. I'll talk a little about the core program, LEDSB, corp. So I'll have a big section at the end for questions and answers. Hoping probably half of the presentation should be located for questions and answers. I find that's the most official workshop. I'm a big fan of humor. I think this is an apt joke in the business world. These are kind of the four key funding areas that we deal with in the BC region. Let's be core, targeted, corp regional, and corp PF. Dixon, if you want to jump in here.
Yeah, so here we've got on the Lands and Economic Development Services Program. So first we'll discuss the core funding. So let's be core. That assists with enhancing the economic development, land and environmental capacity of communities to support the establishment of conditions for economic development to occur, increasing a community's participation in the economy. Services for LEDSB can include community planning and capacity, carrying out economic development activities. Communities may carry these out by hiring economic development officers, land management officers, or environment officers. And this helps to assume greater control over reserved lands, resources, environment, including land use planning, environmental management, and compliance. And next slide. Oh, maybe back one. So next, we'll discuss the LEDSB targeted. So LEDSB targeted, it's a project-based funding, which can be used to supplement the operational funding or core funding, basically to achieve the overall LEDSB objectives of the community. For LEDSB targeted, basically we send out an expression of interest, and based on the expressions of interest that we receive, we send out requests for full applications. So recipients eligible for LEDSB targeted funding: First Nations, communities, governments, tribal councils, organizations that are controlled by the First Nations communities, and additional requirements for LEDSB targeted. Applicants must obviously meet the eligible recipient status. All of the projects submitted must meet all of the eligibility activities, which we'll discuss a little later. And then the project must also meet all of the eligible expenditures. And the application that comes back must include all the sufficient detail for the level of funding, must be completed, and all eligible recipients must be up to date with all of their ISC audits, reporting, and other matters. We've also got eligible projects and activities for LEDSP targeted. There's a vast range of different activities that can be included. These are things like economic development, land management, environment management activities, capacity, development planning, land designations, development proposals to raise financial resources, program management services to community economic development, and some recent examples of projects that have been approved through LEDSP targeted recently, land surveys, permit amendments, additions to reserves, environmental site assessments, community economic development plans, economic development corporation establishments, and land use planning. When we send out the applications, they must fall into four categories. First is the economic development support. So through this category, there will be initiatives that support First Nations communities to undertake developmental activities like capacity development, community economic development planning. Under the category of land support, would be falling into initiatives that support the development of land and resources under community control and access to opportunities from lands and resources not under community control. So like additions to reserve that support economic development. Under environmental management, looking at initiatives that enhance environmental planning, awareness of supports for prevention of pollution, supports of environmental management best practices, community assets on reserve, and also initiatives to improve environmental regulatory compliance on reserves. So the contribution amounts for LEDSP targeted, there's no mandatory project contribution from a community. However, there are a number of factors which determine ISC's contribution. So that comes down to whether or not the project or activities are eligible under the program, the relevance of the proposal to the program's objectives, the overall proposal cost, assessment of the risks involved, the demonstrated need for federal funding, and the minimum amount of funding required to ensure that the project deliverables are achievable within the proposed timeframe. With LEDSP targeted, the projects, well, the funding can be stacked. So other sources may contribute to the proposal as well, such as like federal, provincial, municipal governments, banks, or private investors. So the sourcing can come from multiple sources. However, all of the sources have to be declared, and the maximum level of funding from all stack sources cannot exceed 100%. And the next slide is the expression of interest process. So the expression of interest to be sent out June 1st, 2023. There's no response deadline. However, once funding is completely depleted, ISC will no longer be accepting applications for this fiscal year. And once we receive the EUIs, we'll generally request a meeting for the community to meet with one of the economic development officers. And providing everything meets the eligibility, we'll send out an application package to nations. And then it will be returned with a full complete applications and one proposal quote. And that's Ledsby.
Great, thanks, Dixon. That's awesome. So I'm going to talk a little about our Corp Regional. So we have two streams, Corp Regional and Corp National. The most commonly accessed and most readily available is the Corp Regional. So it'll be the bigger focus of my discussion, as well as we currently have funding available and a recent call. So Corp Regional, it's a pretty useful, wide-reaching program. It can fund most pre-construction soft costs to kind of get your projects off the ground. Get up to 250,000 available. ISC will cover 80%. The nation has to cover the other 20%. Some of the common things we'll see is like construction design, could be legal accounting, could be marketing plans, business plans, feasibility studies, architecture design, environmental assessments. Are more complicated than what Ledsby would cover. It's pretty wide range. The only tricky thing there, we do need is a more expensive item, like over 25,000. We do need 3 quotes. Just keep that mindful. Covered that. The once you kind of work your way through the Corp Regional, the idea is at the end of the day, if you kind of move through these steps, we can get you through the PF. The Corp National framework, it's program offers up to $1 million funding under equity gap or $3 million infrastructure. The confusion between these is just because you're putting in infrastructure doesn't necessarily mean it is an infrastructure project. To be infrastructure to be eligible for $3 million kind of means after you put the infrastructure in, significant opening up significant economic opportunities. So a simple example might be putting in a road. So at the end of the road, mall plaza can be put in. And this mall plaza is the output of that product, and then you can have lots of businesses come up from there. And the Corp PF, this changes the framework a little bit. So the Corp Regional is ongoing. So we can accept your regional applications of 250,000 for your soft costs. We can accept that ongoing anytime. It's much like Ledsby. We'll keep funding projects as they come in until funds get exhausted. And so last year we were pretty well funding projects up until near the end of the year. Every year is a little different. So if you have something in the works, let us know. We're happy to have a meeting. Sometimes I recommend get an application in so we kind of can hold some funds for you as well. We're happy to do that. Available. I just want to kind of just a transition here. We want people to kind of recognize that kind of Ledsby is kind of what you do on the front end. So this is kind of like your business planning, kind of doing research, what kind of businesses could you do on or off reserve. Most ISC funding, 99% of the time, it must be on reserve. Direct on development, we have no such stipulation because often there's lots of great opportunities, nearby or in adjacent communities. Those are actually very prosperous to the community. So we're happy to support that. Happens to be a joint venture or these kind of things, as long as the nation owns 51%. That's kind of the key. And it's offers And then if you kind of move along, so you kind of, the idea would be in theory, you're using Let's Speak, say the community economic development plan, say on this economic development plan, you know, a couple ideas came out of that. Let's say hypothetically, maybe a gas station or a nice Tim Hortons, you know, convenience store. Let's say there's a kind of some of the ideas flagged in the community economic development plan, funded under Let's Speak. And we kind of look at corporate regional, okay, maybe the community feels let's do we could really use a grocery store. So we could use corporate regional to kind of get this project off the ground, maybe do a business plan, feasibility analysis, is it economically viable, maybe look at architecture, design plans that we can fund under corporate regional. Then when it comes to the actual construction costs, we potentially cover up to $1 million. If we got corporate. It's kind of stepping stone.
I'm sorry, but you're blinking in and out with your voice.
Maybe it's the internet connection, not sure. I'm going to skip the shovel-ready checklist because it's a bit complicated, but we can have those discussions one-on-one if people have any big projects they want to talk about. And this is kind of our funding overview. So just starting the Let's Be call out now. So we'll keep funding that as long as available. Corporate regional, the 250,000, and get the call out at the beginning of the year in January. And you keep funding that.
Liam, sorry, Liam, I'm just wondering if you maybe try to turn the video off and see if you sound better, because you do come in a little bit patchy.
Okay.
If that maybe helps a little bit if it's your internet.
Any clearer?
It sounds okay right now.
All right, so the corporate regional, the application process started back in January. And that will be ongoing until our funds are exhausted. And then traditionally, the Corp National was an annual intake every December. And now switch that to be continuous. So this is a fantastic change because previously, if you kind of missed December, you kind of had to wait an entire year. So with this new quarterly intake, essentially almost an ongoing intake process for national. So if you get the corporate regional project lined up and complete, we can fairly quickly move on to the corporate national stream. Some quick stats from last year. We don't have a huge budget. Hoping over time this will get a little bigger. So for example, last year we had $3 million available for core funding. So every nation gets core funding. It's kind of a formula based on the size of unreserved population. As Dixon mentioned, you can use the core funding for various planning services. A lot of people put it towards paying for staffing costs. If you have enough funding there to cover these kind of things. Funded about 14 projects for Let's Be targeted, total of 670,000. That's actually our full budget. Corp Regional funded 3.3 million locally. 23 projects we funded. Corp National, so this is national, it's not just BC. So this is across the country. They actually did a great job last year. It says 22 applications, many of them were not eligible. So almost every eligible application got funded last year, so that was nice to see. This year, the Corp National budget is a little higher, so it's also great additions, opportunity to fund these projects. We kind of want to mention that AFIs, Aboriginal Financial Institutions, are a great resource. So we give them money. They also get funding from other federal agencies, the provinces, and nonprofits. So they have a pretty wide funding revenue source, and they're mandate is to fund First Nation communities development. So kind of some cases we kind of split or task between them. So for example, construction and capital kind of costs, we'll look at projects over 250, but you might have a smaller project that's under 250, so we can't look at that. We don't, because we fund the AFIs to fund that. And some of that's just a little bit simpler process, like our a lot of complicated process. AFIs being a nonprofit, they're much quicker than we are in terms of funding. And so they can kind of look at some of these small projects. As well as one thing we don't do, for example, is business improvement. I get this question a lot, but the AFIs, they can fund business ideas. For example, a couple of requests I've had lately, I have an old website that's 10 years out of date, or maybe you're looking for a new vehicle for your fleet. These kind of things the AFI can fund. For the BC area, so these are the 4 AFIs. It's kind of geographical. So depending on your area, so Lower Mainland. For the interior, All Nations Trust, Deer Only Island. It's a great one. So this was a quick overview of our staff. We all work together as a team. We're all here to help any way we can. This is the currently the acting director. This is a great job program here as our acting manager. So I'm looking after the coast region. Dixon is looking after the north, and Cindy and our economic development officer is kind of looking after or being the net. Coffee joke there. If anyone has any questions, me and Dixon are happy to answer anything we can.
Sure, I'm going to take a look through the chat to see if there are any questions. Turning the video off didn't really help, Liam. You were still cutting in and out. So if you want to turn your video back on, and I'm just going to go ahead and look through the meeting chat. In the meantime, if anybody has any questions, please just go ahead and ask Liam and Dixon.
Maybe I can just summarize, because yeah, it was a little choppy, but just like the main takeaways that we wanted to bring up today is that we do have a call out right now. And the call out is really just a simple form. It's an expression of interest form. If you haven't seen it, we can share it with you. And it's just an opportunity for you to put down whatever your needs are related to any type of lands projects, environmental projects, or if you have a specific project related to an economic opportunity. It's a simple form. It's not a detailed application form. It's just to let us know what your needs are at this time. Then the specific officers for the different units, based on what your needs are, will get in touch with you to get more information about what it is and what kind of funding you're seeking. And then we'll work with you on the next stages, which is the application form. So I don't know if we have a copy of the expression of interest form handy, if either Liam or Dixon has it, but we could also bring that up and show people. But it's just a really straightforward form at this point. We don't want you to go through the whole process of filling an application just yet, because we want to make sure that we have a better understanding of what your needs are. Does it fit our program eligibility? Are the project activities eligible? And once we have more information, then we'll work with you on the application.
Perfect. We have Loretta. She has a question. Go ahead, Loretta.
Morning. I just wanted to, that was related to the expression of interest. If you could put it in the chat or and the link to the form. I was just trying to find it in my emails. So if we already do have a possible shelf ready project, you're wanting us to provide the expression of interest or complete the application? Which is it?
Right now, it's just it's an expression of interest form. So you're just putting on there all your needs. But if you have a specific, say, corp shovel ready project, and that's the only thing that you're seeking, you can get directly in contact with the economic development officer and start working with them. They
Okay.
can do a pre-screening meeting on that specific project with you. So that's if you want to just skip the EOI form and go straight to economic development officer, that's always an option too.
Okay, we do have a fairly active FNIP in place as well with ISC. So are you talking about that as an expression of interest? Some of the overlapping or some of the projects that would fit under corp? That's your expression of interest project list that you would send in?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, okay. Okay, so we probably need to do both then. So we have one
Okay.
shovel ready and then one project list. Okay, thank you.
I'll just read out a couple of questions here. I'm not sure if they were addressed or not, but we'll still look at them. So Tracy is asking, where do we find out if we're in good standing with ISC?
Yeah. So that they can contact their an ISC officer can assist them if they're looking just to see if they're in good standing in terms of their economic development reports or their lands reports. An ISC officer can help with that. But if they're looking at overall good standing with all of their reporting on audits, that would be ideally like a funding services officer. But if you don't know who that is, you can send me your email and I will find out who it is and let you know who the best person is to get in contact about that.
Perfect. Thank you. Melissa has a question. Melissa, go ahead.
Yes, hello. So sorry, do you hear echo?
A little bit, but we can hear you, Melissa.
Okay, so our economic development department is separate from the lands department. And sometimes their projects are not the same as the lands. But can the lands department apply for the economic development funding? Or would we be competing?
Dixon, you want to field that one?
Sorry, I missed that one. I'm having some issues with my laptop here.
She's asking if they have two competing projects, an ECDEV LEDSP and a LANS LEDSP. Can they both be processed, or will we rank them or be competing against each other for LEDSP funding?
I suppose it depends on the projects, and are they separate projects or?
Yeah,
they'd be separate projects.
Yeah, I mean, if it's a separate, if there's separate projects, for different programs, that's fine. You could have a lands project. You could request funding for a lands project, an ENR project. Want to do an economic development plan. You have a corp project, like a new business startup. You could apply for all of them. They're not going to be competing against one another. The only time we would ask you to choose between two projects is if you're applying specifically to corp regional. So you have, say, 2 business startup projects. We may only ask you to let us know which one's your top priority, and we would look at that one, funding that one first. But if you have multiple LEDSP projects, you could submit more than one application.
Perfect. There is another question here in the chat. It is very competitive for corp. Are there examples of past projects that were approved that you could share?
The Corp Regional is not so competitive, and we can fund the majority of the project, but Corp National is quite competitive because it's we don't approve it regionally. We kind of process it regionally, and then we recommend it to headquarters, and it does get kind of top-down ranked. So last year was a good year where most were funded. I'd say traditionally probably 50% get funded. So some of the ones I'd say that do higher ranked and get funding are essentially more employment opportunity, i.e. staff. Staffing levels are a huge factor in the ranking, as well as the amount of revenue. So if you have an opportunity, economic business is only going to create a small amount of revenue. It's not going to rank as well as another business enterprise that's going to, bring in $1 million a year in revenue. So some of the ones you've seen locally are some like plazas. We've seen some a couple gas stations. Sometimes a gas station just by itself is a little bit tricky, but you throw in a convenience store or something like that, often that ranks quite well. Those kind of projects do well. A lot of business plaza malls, those kind of things do really well. Where it gets challenging in some of the smaller operations because it gets a little more challenging on the rankings.
Yeah, and if you're still in the planning stages, one of the things that we require to see is, feasibility study or business plan. And that sometimes will tell us, or at least help you figure out if that project's, feasible in the sense that it's worth pursuing, and if it would even be eligible for the Corp National funding. So if you are still in the planning stages and you'd like to apply for those planning costs, you can come to Corp Regional, which, as Liam just mentioned, it's not as competitive. It's right now we've had an increase in budget, so we have been seeing that that most of the projects that are coming through that are eligible projects are being funded. So now is a great time to apply if you're still in the planning stages. But work with us when you're at any stage. And if you think you have a project that's shovel ready, we can do a pre-assessment with you and help determine, I think, if it's worth applying to the national program.
There was another question I was just looking at. If the application goes out at the same time in other provinces, would you know that? If the call out, is the Let's Be Targeted call out for other provinces happens at the same time?
No, we have different processes for when it comes to the regional funding. Each province they get their allocations for regional funding, and so they each have their own processes for the regional. The national funding is something that's more coordinated and goes at the same time, but it's worth reaching out to. If you don't know who the national or your regional contact is, we can also get you in contact with the correct person, but you can just reach out to them to find out if they have a call out or when they will be doing theirs.
Perfect, thank you. I think that's it in the meeting chat questions. So if anybody else has any questions, please raise your hand or just ask your question.
Liam or Dixon, were you able to share the call out in the chat, or is that something?
If you want to send it,
something we can.
If you want to,
yes, so if you can send it out with the presentation, maybe that will work better.
Yeah, and Anne just had her hand up, but now it disappeared. So Anne, if you have a question, please go ahead.
Thanks. I was just intrigued by was it Aboriginal Financial Institutes? And I was just curious to know if a First Nation wants to work with one of them, do they go directly to the financial institute kind of in their area, or do they work through you in terms of that relationship?
They can reach out directly, then they can work with them because they cover their own funding streams. They might be able to cover more stuff than we can, broader range. We can also work concurrently, but I would say they're a good resource to tap into.
Okay, great. All right, thank you.
Yeah, and so for the AFIs, we usually recommend getting in contact with them if it's a business startup expansion or acquisition. So if there's any kind of planning costs associated with those, they're a good resource. But you can apply to both either ISC or the AFIs if it's for any of those type of projects. When it comes to infrastructure projects, large scale projects like business parks, industrial parks, I think, yeah, it makes more sense to apply to us, as I'm not sure that the AFIs will fund those kind of planning costs.
Okay, thanks for that clarification.
Yeah, there's still work tapping into because they're great for getting commercial loans, which is also one of the requirements under our equity gap. And so the AFIs, I think their interest rates may be a hair higher, but it's much simpler to get approval from an AFI for $1 million for a business startup than from a financial institution like TD or Royal, because they want complicated financials that sometimes you don't have, or maybe the nation isn't big enough, they don't have enough financial history with the financial institutions. So this is where AFIs are great, because we'll kind of provide these loans to kind of get the projects going.
Thank you.
And when the presentation goes out, there was a slide that had the contact information of the 4 AFIs for each of the regions. So their contact information is on there as well as ours.
Perfect. Any other questions? If none, then thank you so much, everybody, for logging in and participating in the webinar. And we will get the slides and the link and the form out to you shortly. Anything else? Liam, Dixon, Vanessa?
No, thank you for hosting and inviting us. Happy to present, and I just encourage reach out to us as early as possible, because it kind of opens the door for tapping into all 3 funding streams, the lead speed, corp regional, and corp national.
Perfect. And Loretta has her hand up.
Sorry, I might have missed it, but will the presentation be sent out to all the people who attended? Okay, great.
Yes,
Thank
I
you.
will do that this afternoon. So
Thank you. Thank you for your time.
no problem. Thank you, everybody, very much, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, everyone.
Thank
you.
you. Have a nice day.
Mhm.
Bye. Thank you.